W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk. In the book summary of The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, we take a deep dive into the hardships faced by African Americans post-slavery in the United States. Key highlights of the book include the Freedmen's Bureau, Booker.T.Washington's stance on industrial education, the oppressive economic system in the Black Belt, and the struggles faced by Black Americans in establishing dignity and equal status. What emerges is a compelling portrait of the challenges faced by this population due to systemic injustices and extensive societal barriers.
The legacy of the Freedmen's Bureau. After the abolition of slavery in the United States in 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau was created to support African Americans' social, economic, and political integration. The Bureau provided education, fair work conditions, and legal representation, but faced opposition for prioritizing one race and interfering with state governance. The opposition made voting rights for Black Americans a feasible alternative, but W.E.B. Du Bois believed that a permanent and well-run Freedmen's Bureau would have successfully integrated African Americans into society. The Bureau was dissolved in 1869, leaving Black Americans vulnerable in a society still heavily against them. The conundrum of African American citizenship. The debate between Booker.T.Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois revolved around the question of how to help African Americans to become equal citizens. Washington proposed that they focus on learning practical skills to gain material wealth and respect, while Du Bois rejected this idea as a compromise that disadvantaged the community. Du Bois believed that abandoning the fight for civil rights would lead to African Americans accepting their second-class status and losing self-respect. He also objected to Washington's idea that advancement should be the sole responsibility of African Americans, arguing that achieving true equality required support from the white population. According to Du Bois, the only path to equality was for Black people to actively demand the same treatment, opportunities, and rights as their white counterparts. Life for African Americans after slavery. After slavery, most African Americans in the South farmed on borrowed land and lived in terrible conditions. Black farmers rented plots from white landowners in exchange for a portion of their crops and couldn't afford seeds, equipment, or even food and clothes to sustain them until the harvest. The housing conditions of most Black farmers in the Black Belt region were appalling, and they had only two options: buy their own land or move closer to towns in search of better opportunities. To illustrate life for African Americans after slavery, Du Bois presents the example of a county in the Black Belt region of the South, where thousands of Black people worked on cotton plantations. Even after slavery ended, most African Americans continued to farm, and over 88% of the population in the county studied by Du Bois were farmers. However, due to a lack of assistance in acquiring land after slavery, Black farmers had to rent plots from white landowners in exchange for a portion of their crops. The landowners also controlled which crops were grown on the land, limiting Black farmers to only growing cotton, which was the only form of payment accepted by most merchants and landowners. The rent system was rigged against Black farmers, keeping them in debt and preventing them from advancing. An increase in the value of cotton led to an increase in the farmer's rent, and if a farmer had a large harvest one year, his rent was increased the following year. Black farmers were also limited in their housing options, with most living in old plantation cabins or new structures built on the same sites. These houses were run down and overcrowded, leading many farmers to search for better opportunities in towns or to find ways to buy their own land, which only a small fraction managed to achieve. Overall, life for African Americans after slavery was difficult, with little support or resources provided to help them succeed in their farming endeavors. Du Bois highlights the systemic oppression that kept Black farmers in debt and prevented them from improving their living conditions, forcing them to make difficult choices to survive. Post-slavery life for Black Americans. Following slavery, Black and white communities remained separated, hindering positive interactions. Du Bois observed that Black and white communities of the same social class rarely had close contact, exposing both races to the worst of each other. Economic opportunities were also divided along racial lines, making it difficult for black people to compete for jobs and progress economically. Black people faced political disadvantage due to voter suppression tactics, making it difficult for them to assert their rights as citizens. Evolution of the African American Church. The African American Church has played a pivotal role in the history of African Americans. From slavery to emancipation and beyond, the Church mirrored the social and political changes impacting black people. It provided a space of comfort for worship, social interaction, and activism. However, even as the Church nurtured and educated its members, it struggled to reconcile the injustices that blacks faced in society. The Church experienced a dichotomy, oscillating between advising submission to denial or an active resistance to advocate for equal rights. Despite this, the Church and its numerous followers remained a beacon of hope, inspiring future generations to continue the fight towards equality. The psychological impact of slavery. African Americans faced a violent internal conflict in their pursuit of civil rights, according to Du Bois. The separation between black and white worlds, symbolized by the veil, distorted the self-image of black people. Emancipation from slavery brought new challenges, including a lack of economic prospects, neglect, and violence. Black Americans then turned to education, voting, and economic advancement to secure equality, but achieving these milestones did not lead to the desired change. Du Bois believed that true equality required a holistic approach, where freedom, education, work training, and political power were all parts of a greater goal. The ultimate aim was to lift the veil and allow black Americans to see themselves without the lens of racism.
As we conclude our journey through the souls of black folk, it becomes evident that the fight for equality and dignity for African Americans was multifaceted and complex. The work of the Freedmen's Bureau, although essential, was curtailed and voting rights were insufficient in addressing those challenges. As a result, industrial education emerged but was seen as a disadvantageous compromise. The African American Church oscillated between acquiescence and resistance, while the oppressive conditions in Black Belt regions hindered progress. With Du Bois' belief that unity, political power, education, and economic opportunity play an important role, this book summary illustrates the indispensable efforts made by the African American community towards self-realization and equality, all the while grappling with an intrinsic internal conflict due to a distorted sense of self.